actually the whole team of us at the district office have been putting together timelines for communication, for education, for possible venues for the dissemination of information for families. So all of that is in the works with a very organized and logical sort of string of to-do lists. But we don't want to do any of that until we know that all of you feel like this is the plan to support.
I just have a question about the focus groups. And how many people came to the focus groups? Did you have representatives from each scenario? I guess if you didn't, can we seek out those scenarios? I guess that's my question.
We had a variety of, we have families from all scenarios recommended to us. 4K parents, 5th grade parents, parents that had children in all of the schools. When all was said and done, we probably had a larger representation from families in yellow. And that's probably because they had a strong inclination that they would be changing schools and they wanted to learn more about it. And so I think that was actually really helpful for us because the plan impacts them the most. And they had children who were in the middle school and RCI and elementary, 4K even. So we had all sorts of scenarios from that angle. And we invited a couple of dozen, and we ended up with, I'd say, 17, 18 families.
Leslie, I have a question about 4K. Do we have a 4K site in the yellow area, or will there be one coming?
Well, the developer in Terra Vesa is very supportive of getting daycare in the area, which very well may include 4K because we would be very eager to partner with anyone who was showing interest in that area. And it's a little early to be able to talk too much more about that, but we feel very strongly that we'll be able to create a good partnership.
So that means presumably there's an area that would be zoned for daycare. Mm-hmm. And then I guess my question is, assuming this will probably be in the Oregon Observer, a report from tonight's meeting, mm-hmm. For people who don't read the Observer, how could they find out about this before the board votes in 2 weeks?
Well, we were discussing how to send information out to parents post this conversation. Okay. So we could send it out via email. We've also spoken about being able to set up some stations, so similar to what we've done for referendums in the past. Mm-hmm. So we could invite people in and give them information in small chunks so that you can have conversations with people, because oftentimes that's really what they need.
So are you looking for the board to give you this looks pretty good kind of reaction before you go to that next step?
Yes.
Before an official vote? Okay.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. I just have a question about if these new boundaries change the length of time for the bus trip. I know that's obviously a topic for parents on how long their children ride the bus. So I'm just curious if these boundaries take that into account and even what impact they may have, good or bad, on the length of time that children might be on the bus within those zones.
Well, we don't have all of the information on bus routes and the exact times. However, one of the things we heard from the focus groups was concern over how much time students who were living in yellow spent on buses to get back to Oregon. And so clearly we'll be able to improve that. So we're excited about being able to improve that for families. And other than that, we don't expect there to be a significant time difference in people getting to and from school.
Thank you.
I know that there's already some conversations about a 4K or several 4K in the area. Will we have room, even if it's in an interim time, to host a 4K at our school for the first couple of years if there isn't a facility ready when those 4K students are ready?
I think there would always be some classroom space in those first 2 years. It really depends on how fast the area build goes up. We were hoping to have that classroom space as flexibility in case, not in case, for when these homes are built and students are registered. But could we do something in the interim? That would be for us to explore.
I'm curious about how the board feels about the next steps in this. I'm comfortable with the process that we've taken with a task force that has community representation, that has explored this and come up with these ideas, and with having the task force or the focus groups review this. The question becomes, is the board comfortable approving this formally as the plan in 2 weeks, or whether we want to give a soft yes and then plan on a formal yes sometime in November to see what feedback we get at that point? I'm just interested in folks' thoughts on
It really is a chicken or the egg. You know, they're waiting for our direction, and we're kind of waiting for the group's direction on this plan, if this is the plan. So it is a chicken or the egg, and the soft yes is something that I would be interested in floating out there, so that they felt comfortable having that communication and getting feedback without a final decision.
Leslie, in the focus groups, was it kind of unanimous support for this idea? Were there some outliers, and if so, were they, particularly vocal? Do you feel they represented perhaps a voice that's out there in the community?
Well, to a person, we didn't have anyone who said this makes no sense or why are you doing this. We had nothing of that. We did learn that for some people, the really wonderful thing is our families love their schools. They love their schools. And even the opportunity to go to a brand new building, it wasn't necessarily something that was making people eager to leave the schools they love. And I think that's a sign of a strong system, right? Where kids and families feel connected to their schools. So some people were really excited about the potential change. Some people felt a little anxious about it. They didn't think that it was illogical or unfair. They just felt concerned about how their child would feel about moving schools. And I think that's a really normal response. And one of the things we learned is that we should really help parents or support them in having some of those conversations, because if you're a second grader, chances are you really, really love your school, and the idea of going to a new one might not be the happiest thought you've had. And so how do we help parents have those conversations with their kids so that the kids feel a little bit better about making a change? And then what can we do as a system to support the kids and make sure they feel good about having a change in their life like that?
Well, you've addressed some of that angst by having as one of your criteria that you're not going to require any student to change their school. I mean, so that goes away. I mean, anytime you change attendance boundaries, it creates a lot of issues, but you take most of that angst away if people who are in a building aren't being forced to move to a different building.
Yes, we
So,
talked about that quite a bit as a group.
Yeah.
I think that would be the thing that we would need to figure out, and concern is too strong of a word, but to get going down this process so parents know where they are placed, and then if there's not we're really excited about it, how we're going to handle that and work through it so we have the numbers that we need at the school. So I think, I'm potentially in favor of a soft yes, but I would really like to see us start moving down this timeline so people can start processing, and you all can also get through what you need to get through to figure out what families are going where.
I'm comfortable too. I mean, there's been a lot of work done. You're always going to have some folks who aren't going to be totally happy with this, but to me, the fact that your group has processed all this over a long period of time and focus group, that gives me some comfort to say that I'd like to do a hard yes sooner rather than later on it. I mean, I think we can go around tonight and say, has anybody got any problems with this on the board without voting? And and you can kind of work with that as a soft yes and plan unless something really unusual happens for us to take a hard yes in 2 weeks. I think that's sufficient time. I mean, I'm assuming you do some communication, Erica, between, it looks like the board's in favor of this one, or there was positive feedback on the plan, and they're going to vote whether to approve it or not at the next meeting. How are people feeling on that?
I would imagine that's going to take some time, though. And so what's going to change in the next 2 weeks? If it's just about communicating back and we feel comfortable with a firm yes today. That's right. It's not on the agenda. Okay.
And we can invite
Forget
people
it.
to come for public comment, right? I mean, that's the role of what we do with a lot of different things, is that we vote on it and we publicize it, and maybe we have to do a little more publicizing, but let people know that this is the time for public comment because the board is going to vote on it.
Are people feeling comfortable with the plan from what you've heard, or any really things that raise red flags for anybody on the board?
No red flags for me. I think it's very sensible. And when I go back to your guiding criteria, I didn't see anything that I really question about the plan with respect to the guiding criteria. For me, I'm interested in the timeline, I guess the timeline of the exemption requests, and specifically how that would impact open enrollment requests for next year. That's just something that's in the back of my mind. I don't understand how those two things are going to coincide with how we would approve either of those. But otherwise, I'm in support of taking this to the next step.
So to answer your open enrollment question, remember we have 2 opportunities for open enrollment because the board sets the space in January. And traditionally we've been conservative because once we set the space, we can then go back and raise it in June, but we can't lower it. So I would anticipate that we would have the same operation style, that in January we would set our spaces maybe conservatively, but then we could see where the number is, and spring is going to be a great time to check development and housing, and then we can always raise it in June. So we do have those 2 opportunities.
Is there a rule of thumb that we've been able to use that we would expect X number of open enrollment? I mean, are we talking about 10 or 15 people, or are we talking about 40 people?
And we do have that historical data that we can bring in January as well. Typically, our numbers have been higher at the different change points. So kindergarten, 5th grade, 7th grade, 9th grade, which makes sense.
Tim, it's been 10 or less at the elementary level. And there were some years where we closed it for an entire grade. So one of the considerations that we talked about when we had one of our district office meetings, there is a danger at setting it at 0, because the moment you set our open enrollment available seats at 0, other community members that are not residents will turn Oregon off as a consideration. And remember, many of the families are applying to 1, 2, in some cases 3 different schools. I would anticipate if we had to make a decision today, it's going to be in that less than 10 range for K-6. We have significant flexibility at the high school level because of available seats in the various classes that we offer. So that likely will be as it's been historically. And remember, the goal is the matriculation of the kids. The high schoolers will matriculate faster than some of our big enrollment levels at the elementary. They won't even get to the high school while the students we're currently accepting will have already graduated. So there are just a number of moving parts with it, but like we did last year, actually for the last several years, we've been very conservative on open enrollment, and we have been closed with special education students for goodness, must be 7, 8 years now at least. So, and that's an important piece because that's an area where we have less flexibility over offering a program at higher costs for our kids.
Any red flags? Any over here? Okay. I think what you're hearing is a positive on this, and so Brian and I will work on putting this on the agenda as a hard yes vote for this plan in 2 weeks. One thing you could bring is like, assuming that happens, what the timeline looks like. Okay. And board need anything else from Leslie? Or
No, I just wanted to say thank you to the task force
Yeah.
for really, that's a tough job. And,
a really tough
you know,
job.
sometimes you make some people angry when you make change like that, but I think that was really, sorry, Mark, thank you too for your guidance as well. Really important.
It really helps us when we have, you know, a broad-based group do all the groundwork for us and assemble the data, and then we get to just look at it and try to understand it. Thank you, community members, for helping us out.
I really can't say enough about the task force and the members. People were very committed to this, and they really thought about it. And, you know, in between sessions, they thought about it, and our discussions were rich. And so their input really made all the difference.
Thank you. So now we'll transition into the second part of our committee of the whole work, and that's the naming of school board. Yeah, we don't want to, school 4. I didn't see that as one of the options. School 4.
I am really, really excited to call it something other than the 4th elementary school.
Yeah.
So I've been excited for tonight.
And Erica, you're going to lead this, and then I think Brian's going to
Yep.
assist then, because we have an exercise for us to
Gonna
get
tee it
us
up.
to the point where we have to go.
Yep, I will tee it up, and then Dr. Bussler will take over. So real quick here, go ahead, Andy.
Dots tonight?
You are
Yes,
lucky
you
to
are.
be
All right.
doing dots tonight. So just a really quick review of the process and how we got to where we are tonight. So our timeline, thank you. Our timeline started out in August 28th. We opened up the process for people to submit names. Anyone in the community was able to submit names, and we held it open for about a month. And here we are for tonight. We will hopefully be narrowing it down to a small list of options. And then ultimately, the students will take the options that you come up with, and the students will vote on the names. So again, just you have all this in your packets. I believe it was in the board packet, but criteria for consideration, aligning with the mission, of course. That's in everything that we do. Adhering to the school board policy, and that's going to be coming up on the next page I can remind you of. It represents the geographical area, endures over time without controversy, doesn't be confused with other regional names, translates well in other languages, lends itself to an appropriate acronym, and is easily pronounced by elementary students. Policy 616 was approved by you recently, I believe, right, last year. So it basically, the 3 main points summarized, it can be named after a geographical location. It can be named after an inanimate object of significance to the area, and after a historical person who has exemplary character, who has not been living for at least 20 years. So we had a process for submissions. We accepted them both electronically and via paper. What you see is a paper, example of the paper form that was distributed. And we had a handful of paper submissions, but most were electronic. And we also, in the process, both on our website and on the form, we were very clear about the considerations that we'd be doing. And we asked people to say, tell us the name, but also tell us why you think that's a great name. So here, this is really amazing. We had a total of 204 names that people submitted for the process. So I thought that was pretty awesome with a month for people to submit. We got submissions from students, parents, community members all across the district. I mentioned mostly online. A few were excluded, 26, because they didn't meet the criteria, one of the ones that I just discussed. 38 of them were duplicate names. So for the purposes of tonight, we still retained all the information about why those names were great individually. But in terms of unique names, there will be 140 unique names for you to look at tonight and go through the process in. And so here we have for tonight's goal, and you have the materials. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bussler now.
Board members, what you have in your packet and in the report that Erica put together, you have all the names, and again, what an impressive list of names that came to the district. We didn't take a poll or a guesstimate on how many. I was thinking we'd have over 100, and to get over 200 is really quite amazing. And obviously, the duplicate names we've all put together, and you saw in the packet when there was a name, and I'll use an example, Nine Springs Elementary School. That was very popular, and we tried to put all of that rationale together underneath it. I think what we'd like to do at sort of the end, but we're not at the end yet, is use an affinity diagram process. And I'll just give you a little reminder, when we use an affinity diagram process, some people think of it as a vote. I think of it as a prioritization. And everyone will have, what I'd like to do is provide you with 5 different dots, and you can place the dots on one of the 140 items. Now, there's always someone that says, what if I really like a name and I want to put all 5 dots on it? I suppose technically you can do it. I think it would be wiser to not put more than 2 dots on one name if you really like that name. There are all kinds of theories about affinity diagram. At the end of the day, it all tends to work itself out. I've had a couple of conversations with Steve, and I'm not sure where you've really landed how many names you would like to give the students. I could see you giving the students 2 names. I could see you giving the students sort of up to 5 names. I think at a certain point, it's too many names to provide. So think of somewhere between 2 and 5. And one of the values, well, one of the benefits of using an affinity diagram is after you do that, we can look and see if there's sort of a natural cluster of names. We might find there's only 3, or we might find that there's 4 or 5, and maybe we have to do the process one more time. But before we get to the point of actually doing the affinity process, Erica has spent a significant amount of time doing research. I think we may have set a record with the size of the board packet that we sent to you, totaling almost 500 pages. I can tell you I've read a lot, and you see the one picture on the screen from the city of Fitchburg in terms of historical information, and it is amazing what historical societies will keep. But I thought before we did anything with the affinity diagram process, what might be most important is if you have questions about any of the names, obviously before you do any prioritization, we would like to make sure that you have any of those questions answered. So I know you have paper copies and electronic copies. If you just want to walk through a couple of pages, and we can do it silently, and you can just read, and if you have a question on a particular name, toss it out, and I'm certain Erica will have an answer for it.
Let's go back to process for a minute, though. We can't take action tonight in terms of how many are going to be referred out. So I was thinking that we do the affinity process or the dot exercise to narrow the field. We see what we've got and come back in 2 weeks then and have a conversation about how many of that field we want, and if there's any more information we need about the name.
So maybe we're cutting to 20 or 25 tonight,
It just depends on what the
Or who
dot
knows?
shows.
Just
I mean,
depends
the
on what the dot
dot
shows.
might show we have 6 or 5 that are really popular. We can say, we want to look at those to see whether we want to move 5 or 2 of them on, as opposed to making that final cut decision tonight. No. I'm not either. Okay. We'll know better when we do the dots, how we want to go.
I guess,
Troy?
question for others, is 5 dots enough for people? Do we want to go higher than that, since we're at a point where we're just kind of prioritizing or
Yeah, I mean,
clearing?
it's kind of hard to go from 140 to 5. I mean, I don't know.
Courtney, do you want more dots?
Normally, the way the process works, if you're looking to get to a certain number, that's usually the number of dots you use. You could use 7, but I think you're in that 2 to 5 range.
All right. Tim's ready to go.
Yeah, we
Are
are.
you going to put them all on one?
We are ready. Yeah, we are ready to give you dots, but we want to make sure if you have any questions about the names, we know you studied it since the packet's been out, but if you have questions, we're happy to answer any of those questions.
I don't have questions per se. I just want to say that a lot of these names were really thoughtful, and I think that the reasons given were detailed and interesting. And while we may not choose some of those really detailed, great ideas, they were still really good ideas. And I want that to be communicated back to all of our name submitters, because there were some really terrific, thoughtful, provocative ideas. Nothing was off the table, and they're all valid. So it's going to be hard to choose, I think.
So are you handing out
Yeah,
the
board
dots?
members, any questions? Any questions on the names? Otherwise, you are going to get 5 dots. And there's no time limit.
Other than there's a Packer game that's ongoing. Not that that's important.
It's very helpful for you to provide the names that are already taken by another community, because they sound familiar.
Yeah.
They're losing 3-0 in the first.
If you guys are ready, we have some dots. I even have some green and gold ones. Tim? There you go.
Wow, awesome.
Get a little bit of both.
Thank you.
You can pick your color.
I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you. Kidding.
You're not going to want to check this one.
Sorry. You have the thing that's going around, huh? How long have you had it? Yeah, right.
No, I know.
Looking that way, excuse me.
Not bad. It's a great name.
Yes, right. I still like Flubber Elementary.
Nice.
I do want to give Flubber one.
Don't even start. Don't even go there.
Chris, are you taking away all my fun?
Yes, I am. This is why you didn't get 7.
That's why I didn't get 7.
Yeah, I'm interpreting that as 39. But I will double check because everyone's been going to it, right? Yeah, I think that's 3. Oh, there's.
This is number
Is there another two? Okay, here's what you have. You have 5 schools that have 3 or more. You have 7 schools that have 2 or more. So you have sort of a first cut, first review. What we could do is take either the 5 or the 7 and sort of drill down on those and give you a summary document by the end of the week, just listing those schools with the rationale associated with it. And that takes us from bigger to small, or to focus and reflect on for a period of time. Because Steve mentioned, tonight is not the night to take action on what those names are that you would provide to the students.
I heard some of you have a conversation over there about why you liked a particular name or not. I think it's appropriate to kind of just talk right now as we go forward, is whether anyone struck you in particular, or 2 or 3, and why. And then I like Brian's idea of then taking that information, and the next time we come back and say, how many do we want to move on and which ones? Okay. Courtney, I heard you talking.
Well, one of the things that I wish I had said before we voted was I'm not sure that all board members remember or recall that the whole concept of the school plan is based around nature and the elements. And I think one pod is about earth, and one pod is about air, and one pod is about water, correct? Something to that effect. So it might be nice to consider a name relative to that, as opposed to just a geography name. That was kind of the point I was going to make. That's all.
We could name it after Earth, Wind, and Fire, and we'd have some theme songs that they could play.
It'd have to be dead for 20 years.
Yeah, that's right. Well, their music's been dead for 20 years, so. Yeah. We're a committee of the whole, we're supposed to be informed.
That's true.
So one thing that I was mentioning is I had voted for one of the Wabisa names, because when I worked for the city of Fitchburg and we were planning the Terra Vista neighborhood, the West Wabisa watershed is a significant natural body that this whole area drains into. And a lot of really important stormwater design elements were put into that development to minimize the impact to those wetlands and the Wabisa watershed. So I like using that element for a potential name because of the significance of the natural water body that this area drains to, the watershed that it's part of. That's all I had.
Yeah. I think I'm the nearest one to an old timer here on that, and we have always referred to that area as Nine Springs. I mean, it's Nine Springs Hill. Where are you going? It's Nine Springs Hill. We knew the Nine Springs area where people lived. We always said that was Nine Springs area. And the E-Way is out there that runs from Verona Road all the way to Wabisa, which is a really significant natural resource there. And it's been there. I looked, I didn't print off the whole Fitchburg Town Hall thing, but I did look at the pages that were referenced in there. And way back into the 1800s, it's been referred to, that hill's been the Nine Springs Hill.
Are there 9 springs there?
In Fitchburg there are. I don't think it's in that location, but that Nine Springs feeds that whole E-Way into watershed, which is why back to the 1800s it's been referred to that, so. Yeah, I tried Googling, what the Nine Springs were. I couldn't find them, other than people referred me to that book, and they said that it's for 100+ years been referred to as Nine Springs, and that hill in particular, the one you go down to, has been that's Nine Springs Hill. Yeah, so I like that. I liked Wabisa too, just because that's the Wabisa watershed over there as well. Those are the two that really, and then Forest Edge as well, just because we have the woods behind there.
I know that Brian was asking if we wanted to narrow it down to 5 or 7. I would suggest we go with the 7 that have the most votes to at least bring to the table for the next discussion. I'd be interested in looking at all 7 as opposed to narrowing it down to the top 5 at this point, personally.
Anybody have any problem with that? Okay, well, so Brian, why don't you, we'll bring back the top 7 vote getters. If Erica, you want to put together that list and then the rationale for each one, and then so the decision point next time will be to determine how many we're going to forward for elections or vote by the student body and which ones. And I hadn't introduced Jenna Sharkus, who's our student rep, because we're in the committee of the whole. We're going to talk to you a little bit later. But I met with Jenna and Cubby. I forgot Cubby's last name. Vandermouse, who's at soccer tonight. He was going to come here, but he's playing soccer. About the role that student council can play, and Cubby and Jenna in running the vote out from the board to the student body and what role you can play. And we'll talk about that more next time. Yeah. Okay, got good direction?
That is perfect. We will be back. We're off to item number 3
That thing wasn't so bad.
in Committee of the Whole, and this is school start times. Erica and I have roughly 10 slides, I think, not more than 10 slides. But before I click to the first one, this is part of the conversation that we've had for a couple of years in terms of the Visioning Committee taking a look at it. And I want to provide you with, my first comment is feedback that the board's already shared with us. And that feedback was, bring a plan, and we want to make a decision on school starting time that's not based on transportation, but that's based on education, educational values, educational importance. So we have anchored these couple of slides specifically on the educational merits and research on school start times. Now, we can't deny the fact that there is a connection to transportation. And one of the questions that we heard earlier about bus routes and less wait time, with our new busing system that Andy and Mark have been working on, they believe with this set of start times, we can accommodate that. And I'll dust off your memory. There's one sort of pivot point, and that's about 45 minutes between the start of the high school, middle school, and the start of the elementary school. That's sort of the pivot point.
I don't know if you know Laura Stoller, everybody. That's Laura, who's a teacher at the middle school and is the president of the OEA. And we had a leaders meeting last week, and I said, hey, we're going to talk about this. You guys can come and be at the table as we talk about items that are relevant to your staff.
And again, in terms of background, we've taken information from the Vision Steering Committee. We've had conversations at administrative team. We've landed on this as a starting point for school start times. We still haven't done our school engagement process yet. I have a memo ready to go to all staff at the conclusion of tonight's meeting to bring them up to speed, because we know this will get printed in the Oregon Observer this week. We're also going to provide some updated information to parents. But again, we are at the beginning of this journey. We are not at the end of the journey, but we are interested in your feedback on it. With growth brings opportunity, and you can see some words there. Change is sort of it's a challenging word. We attempted to base our decision on our 5 values and what we've known from research in terms of sleep patterns, looking at the whole child. We're also sensitive to parent concerns and staff concerns about how long does bus duty take. We're having students dropped off at school and they're waiting at school, either at the beginning of the day or at the end of the day. So we also know that we've used busing and transportation to balance our class sizes. We've attempted to have reasonable class sizes at all of our schools. Now that we're going to 4 elementary schools, we need to continue that theory that we've used with balancing class sizes, and Leslie and the task force have encompassed that into their recommendations. In terms of our approach, you might have seen this before. It's the approach that we've used back with the 2014 referendum. The first thing we attempted to do was responsibly plan, and then go out and listen to community members and school staff, and then ultimately finalize our plan. We are at the responsibly plan session right now. Although we're interested in the board's feedback, but we also know this is a multi-step process that's going to take a little time to get through. In terms of the Vision Steering Committee work, many of you will remember those early 7 or 7:15 or 7:30 a.m. meetings. And one of the topics that came up at Vision Steering was adolescent sleep patterns and what implications that has for school start times and transportation. We have actually been trying to crack that nut for a few years. I looked back at our data, and we started that conversation in November of 2016. Since that time, we know there have been a few other Dane County districts that have made some adjustments to their school start times, which doesn't mean we need to make that same adjustment, but school start time adjustments are very common, and they have been made in the district. Or in Dane County. I would also say we don't want to change school start times often. That is a decision we'd like to change on a less than frequent basis. I'm not sure how long it's been, although the school start times haven't, when RCI was open. I know they hadn't changed in the last decade plus since I've been here. That's not uncommon. Districts get into patterns and they don't change. Usually the driving force for changing school start times is the opening of another school. And I've had that experience in other communities where a district went from 1 middle school to 2 middle schools, and that, or added an elementary school into the mix. That really causes the need for looking at school start times. Erica found this information from the American Academy of Pediatrics, a reasonably well-known group. And in a nutshell, middle and high schools should start at 8:30 or later. And that was really consistent with the conversations that we had at the Vision Steering Committee. How do we flip that start time for elementary earlier, middle and high school later? Again, if you think of it in terms of a puzzle, and like many of you know, I love puzzles. At the center of our puzzle is the adolescent sleep patterns, and items that go around the puzzle include balancing class sizes. That is a super important item for parents. It's a super important item for best educational practices, as well as for our teachers and our paraprofessionals. We also know, for those of you that have been on the board for a few years, we've had some challenges with improving bus route length. And Andy and Mark have been working on a plan with our consultant. I don't remember the name of the firm, but I do remember the consultant. His first name is Griffin. And one of the recommendations that he's made to us is we can narrow that bus wait time if we have that 45-minute pivot between when elementary schools start and when high school starts. And then obviously the student school schedule is an important part of this puzzle too. This is a quick summary of where we currently are, and you see we're close in times at the elementary, but not exact. We have a bit of a delay at RCI, and then we're close in times, but not exact at the middle school and high school. And you've probably noticed the student day column. The student day column has quite a bit of variety. When we looked at the 2020-21 school year, we tried to narrow and make things more consistent. So we're sending a consistent message to parents and students, and you'll also notice the student day looks different. We've tried to balance out the student day. That doesn't, and we haven't framed that for teachers. One of the things we've talked about administratively is that the school leadership teams need to take a look at that student day and figure out what some of those opportunities are with a longer school day. You'd see it's longer at the elementary level. A concern that we've heard over the last couple of years happens to deal with lunchtime. And lunchtime being either super fast at the elementary or a little too long at the high school level. So we'd like a recommendation from our school leadership teams on how that student day time, with it being consistent, what that would look like down the road. I think we did it in less than 10 slides. I didn't count it. It was 8. Perfect. Again, we're not wired in tonight for a super long presentation. We're interested in gathering your initial thoughts. We're interested in gathering if you think we've missed some things, as I'm dusting your memory off from our Vision Steering Committee conversation from several years ago. So I will stop and see if you have some feedback for Erica and me, and we will bring that back to our administrative team.
Just a quick kind of immediate reaction or question to the change in start time for OMS. And I guess I don't know how many parents are doing this, but I would presume that some parents who are choosing to drop their students off at the school when they leave for work are doing so earlier than the school day begins. So just wondering what sort of plan might be in place for that kind of an impact to families, because I would expect that may be an impact to some families depending. So obviously this is preliminary, as you've mentioned, but that's a question that would come to mind on that change.
Yeah, we've had a conversation that irregardless of our start and end times, particularly I'll go with our start, some families are going to drop their children off earlier. And we're going to need to increase some of our paraprofessional time in the morning to accommodate that. We're not going to have students standing out in the rain. When parents are dropping off kids, I can remember a few years ago when Jim Pliner was the principal at the middle school, it seemed like we had the entire middle school in the gymnasium before school starts, and we had staffing there to help and to oversee that. I would anticipate as we move through a change, we're going to need some additional staffing in the morning because parents are going to drop their children off as they're heading out Highway 14 to their place of employment. So we're aware of that. We don't have all of those details figured out, but we're not going to be a closed campus where young people can't come in. And I know many of you that have had high school age children or have high school age children now. Some young people start showing up at about 6:15 every day in the Commons. We anticipate that to continue. One of the conversations at the Vision Steering Committee was we need to be really cautious about not scheduling high school activities before school starts, because we could easily fill that time that we're supposed to have extra sleep with practices for co-curricular activities. There have been conversations about a 0 hour or an additional class, and if we're going to go with a later start, we really want to protect and make sure that we're not eating that up with other activities.
I would say a thing addressing that too is, I don't know I think we have to think about programming though. We've got a fitness center, so it would not be mandatory activities or club-based, but opportunities that is programming for kids. That could be physical fitness. I think the other thing is, as I look at these times, I think this is good, but we also have to think about breakfast. A lot of kids are not eating breakfast, and now some are a little bit earlier. And I know Sarah with our new food service, she was at the wellness committee. She's amazing. I think the board would love to hear from her. But I think there's some really important things that she can impact in terms of getting our kids breakfast, because we know that if kids are hungry, they're not going to learn.
Brian, you mentioned that the elementary schools have a quick lunchtime and the middle school and high schools have a protracted lunchtime. And is it as a result of that, though there's a longer day for those elementary school kids and a shorter day for those high school and middle school kids? I mean, is one a result of the other? To give elementary school more time at lunchtime?
Like in the future, yes,
Okay.
that would be a possible choice. Right now, it is so tight at the elementary with the 6 hour and 50-minute time that to provide additional time for lunch would really be hard.
And then on the middle school and more on the high school side of things with that longer lunch period, it seems, at least when our kids were going to school, it's just long enough to think you can go to Stoughton for lunch, but not quite long enough to actually do it.
We'd end that if someone would build a Culver's in Oregon,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
I will address that super dicey issue because that is something that we're going to hear feedback on, and it's balancing out a concern. We certainly don't want young people racing to get out of the community in order to get lunch. But if we were to modify the high school lunch schedule by 15 minutes, and I know that because Jim's been talking about it, that would narrow down the opportunity for young people to go to other communities to get lunch. On the positive side to that, we also have a brand new high school food service program with a brand new food service director that is likely going to take our program in a direction that's new. That's what happens when you have someone new with fresh eyes from a large school district. So that's certainly a possibility. I am super sensitive. I still have a few bumps and bruises from the conversations a decade ago plus when we talked about closing campus for freshmen. And I heard an oh gosh. So I think some of us have a few bumps and bruises from that. What we're trying not to, and we know there's some value for students having some off-campus time so they get away from school. But certainly from a school safety standpoint, we do not want young people or older folks, racing to get lunch during a really tight time frame. But I know that's an issue that we're going to hear about.
I would like to hear what Laura says, because you're here at the table and it's our opportunity to hear your input.
Recognizing that it's going to come back out to you guys too, yeah, and if there are any issues, that red flag issues that we need to think about too.
Well, I certainly appreciate the opportunity to be at the table, and also the question about the middle school, because being there, that's of course was one of our big ones. We have kids right now who are dropped off before 7, and we provide supervision from 7 until 7:45. But what is that going to look like if they're dropped off at 7 and we're not starting till 8:30? And certainly, I think at the high school, the supervision isn't quite as much of an issue as it would be for us. So that's a concern that I would have. The other question that comes up is the fact that at the middle school and the high school, kids are released early some days for sports. In fact, we had an email that tomorrow we have kids being released at 2:15 for a sporting event. So that means they're already missing an hour. So what is that going to look like in the new schedule? They're going to be missing an hour and a half. Certainly things that we can work through, but those are concerns, right? So how do we handle those things? And then I think another big question we have with the elementary schools, those teachers right now have an hour and 10 minutes outside of the student contact day that they use for collaboration, working together, taking care of meetings. So if their contact time increases, what does that look like? And I suspect, we talked about looking at the possibility of increasing lunch or recess, things like that. But just being really conscientious and mindful about what does that look like? Because I think our elementary teachers are often, they have a very different pace of their day than middle and high school teachers. And I say that having been an elementary school teacher for a long time. So I think we just want to make sure that we're very mindful about what that looks like for them, and don't just dump, an extra half an hour of contact time on them without making a plan and being thoughtful about how we do that. So those are some of the immediate kind of questions and concerns that we have right now.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Laura. And I would just emphasize one of Laura's points about the contact time. I mean, when I look at this schedule, I really like that all schools have the same length of a student day in terms of the staff and equity for staff between schools. But what is flagging to me is that extra 25 minutes for the elementary teachers. And like, as you said, Laura, does that mean additional contact time, or how are we going to handle that? Because that, and to your point about the pace of the day, it is a different pace for those younger teachers.
And I think just to kind of explain that a little bit for those who maybe aren't educators, in the elementary world, those kids are your kids, right? You are responsible for them all the time, and things happen all the time that change your schedule. In a middle school, when that bell rings, the kids walk out the door, right? And I am not responsible for them. And so although we have planning time built in for our elementary teachers, I think theirs is much more often, I'll say, eaten up by other things, right? And not out of anybody's fault. It's just how elementary school works. And so I think we just want to be really mindful of what those plans are going to be, and make sure that we're protecting them. I will also say I have students who are very excited about this whole thing. Not that they have seen this or know this, but we read an article about student start times. I have a club that is currently trying to write a letter to all of you to advocate for this, so they'll be super excited.
Yeah, Brian articulated how this all started, but this solves a couple problems. One, from an operational standpoint, we've been really trying to work on that bus route issue and the wait time for a long time, and this reduces the wait time for kids, or the length of time that kids are on the bus. And one of the questions that I had for Brian is that even though we're starting them at 7:45, they're going, at the elementary school, they're going earlier, 15 to 20 minutes earlier. That may actually reduce the amount of time that they're on the bus and shorten that time. So even though they're starting earlier, that doesn't mean that we're bumping back the time when they have to get up and get on a bus.
So do we have that type of information that would give us an idea of what that average change would be as far as bus ride time? Or, I mean, that would be a good piece of information to assist helping to educate and inform not only the board but the community at large on the benefit of this change in start times.
So we've been working on that. This Thursday, we're going to have our first draft of the bus routes. We kind of needed the information that we talked about earlier this evening about where we're going to bus and where we're not going to bus to start that process. So we got to start on it probably about a month ago or so, and hopefully we should have some information starting this Thursday.
But I know when we talked as a vision steering committee that any plan that you used, you needed a 45-minute gap to run the buses on a double route. And if you did that way, you were shortening the time that, under our current system, that the kids were on the bus. So they weren't having to get up as early of that. So
I know there will be support in the community for that.
as do we have. Before you got on the board, we were getting emails on that.
And board members, one of the questions that you will likely get is, why not just buy extra buses and we could all start at the same time, and that would eliminate having different start times? The answer to that is that's possible, but that is super expensive, because each bus route costs in that, depending on length, $80,000 to $100,000 range. And previous boards and previous administrations in the district have said, we're not going to do that. We're going to focus more money into the classroom on reasonable class sizes and into instruction, as opposed to paying for transportation. So that's a question I get a lot from parents. Why can't we just do it all at the same time? And when we get 3 or 4 minutes to talk through it, there's usually an, oh, yes, I see that. I'd rather spend the money on the classroom. And to borrow Tim's phrase, this is a little, it may be a couple of chickens and a couple of eggs here in terms of the school starting time, in terms of the boundary, and then in terms of overlaying a transportation system that's going to match what we perceive as the best boundaries and the best start times.
The other thing, in addition to that operational piece, was, taking to mind Jim Ricklebaugh's book on the 5 levers. We just don't want to make a structural change to make a structural change necessarily, although this helps in one sense. But the medical evidence is pretty clear that bumping that start time back at the middle and high school level carries with it some health and educational benefits too. So, Tim?
What other schools in Dane County are starting at 8:30 at the middle school and high school level? Do you know offhand?
I know Verona does. I think their high school's at 8:30.
And they believe Monona Grove. We have a summary of those data, and I can provide those.
I'm just curious.
Provide that to the board.
You obviously got some experience.
Yes.
In this later.
We are not, we would not be the lone Dane County School District doing this.
I just want to say that I was at the Vision Steering Committee meetings when we talked at length about the health benefits of doing this. And with all the challenges our young people seem to have these days, and the concern about mental health issues that we're seeing, it seems like it's pretty compelling to me that this could really have some benefits. I do think that issue you brought up, Laura, about kids turning up at middle school so early is definitely a concern. And I guess one of my questions is, these kids could be taking the bus, right? So we don't know exactly why parents are dropping them off, whether because they want to make sure that the kids actually get to school, or to have time with kids in the car. I'm not sure, but maybe we need to explore that a little bit more about encouraging parents to have kids take the bus so that they're getting to school at a appropriate time and getting the benefits of extra sleep that we hope to provide.
Okay,
I guess,
go ahead. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
guess just to kind of piggyback on that, I would really would love to see some data or some conversations with families and look at this through an equity lens too, because I think there are reasons why kids are being dropped off early. And I really would love to see a programming plan associated with this or addressing some of those equity concerns. And so families know that they're not on their own with this change, that we've thought through it and that we've got some answers about things that we can help them with.
To follow up on that, I was also thinking that with some of our families, I suspect that older siblings provide childcare. And I'm sure that that's going to be a concern that you'll hear when this goes forward. And one other thought I had, just going back to the increased time, especially for our elementary folks, I hope that we look closely at the recess option, because talking about, what research says and what's best for kids, they need to move, right? And I think we try to implement that in our day, even like at RCI and OMS, but I think this would be a wonderful opportunity to do that. And so I guess my question to that is, when deciding what those extra minutes, or in the case of the middle school and the high school, the decreased minutes, is that going to be a building level decision, a board decision? Like, what does that look like? How are those decisions made?
I'm happy to jump in on that. First pass, we're still in the responsibly planned phase, and part of that is having building principals work with school leadership teams to flesh out those details. I think ultimately, and we've gone back and forth, I've sort of teased the board a little bit in terms of, is this on my card or is this on your card? Administratively, we're happy to come up with a final recommendation, and obviously something this big we're going to share with the board. And we'd be happy to have the board, make the final decision. We're okay if the board views this as an operational item and we do it administratively. Because here's the key point. At the end of the day, our goal is to make as many people as we possibly can happy and accepting of the change. Now, we'd like to shoot for 101%, but I have a feeling we might not hit 101%. We might be a little bit south of that. But again, the goal is to make this a cultural change in our community so people understand why would we change those start times at the elementary? Why would we change them at the middle and high school? So this is more of a marathon and not a one day, one time conversation.
And the plan is, though, that we would have these in place for the start of next school year, because that dovetails in with the transportation plan for opening elementary school number 4. I haven't been dead 20 years yet. Some would argue.
So in the meantime, we welcome the conversation, board members' feedback that you get from community members. Erica and I are working on something to send out to parents yet this week. We also want to send something out to school staff tonight so they don't get surprised by reading it in the Oregon Observer on Wednesday. And by getting this conversation started, it's going to create conversations and questions that we haven't heard of yet. We're also going to put a frequently asked questions page on the website so we can get ahead of it and provide as much information. And in the meantime, if you get a question from a parent, just route it to Steve or route it to me, and we are happy to respond to them.
And I guess my initial inclination is that moving the start times, the start times for each of the buildings is probably going to be a board decision to do that, but the operational, how that takes place, and what are you going to do with the minutes, and what about the program, all the questions, the implementation questions are for you guys to do. But off the top of my head, I think that's a board decision from a recommendation from the administration. But we can talk further about that. Okay. Last item. School calendar. And you're swapping out? And you guys know Nate Johnson. Hi, Nate.
No. Okay, so we have a purple, which you'll be looking at when you get back into the board session, and then everyone should have a calendar at their place. So in terms of the calendar for 2020-21, we followed a very similar process that we have in the past. We surveyed parents and staff regarding the calendar. We had 838 survey responses, which is very typical. This is my 8th calendar that I've worked on, and we've always had over 800 respondents. So that's pretty exciting. 83% of our respondents had children in the district, and about 43% of our staff responded. So we feel like we have good, solid data regarding the calendar. As is very typical, is our community is very split on their feelings about the calendar. We did receive 200 comments, so that tells you that this is something that people are very interested in. And in the purple that I prepared, I gave you really the highlights from the survey, but you do have the survey and all of the comments in the packet and is public on the web for everyone to see. In terms of what we asked this year, we usually don't have a lot of flexibility in our calendar when you look at the parameters that we have in putting it together. And the board looked at the parameters last May in terms of, so we followed a very traditional structure. One thing that we continue to work on educating people, and I put it right in the email about the survey, is that state law provides that the earliest we can start is September 1. But we always have interest in starting before then, and that is something that WASB does work really hard to educate our legislators about, but that is the one piece of our calendar we're not able to change. So 2021 is a little bit interesting because September 1st is before Labor Day. So I have received calls about that, but recommend that we start September 1 because we just need those instructional days. In terms of the PD days in August become a little bit tricky because we're starting before Labor Day. So in talking with Laura and the OEA about that, I understand the executive committee met earlier and they're comfortable with the recommendation of having the PD days in August on the 26th and the 27th. That gives teachers time to prepare in their classroom if that's what they would like to do. Going through the calendar, and I should say this calendar is a hybrid of the draft calendars A and B that were sent out to families. So what we do is look at the survey responses, and I do tell all of the parents and staff that the calendar could be a hybrid depending on their feedback. So this isn't calendar A or B in the survey, it is a mix of both based on their responses. So we typically have 2 professional development days in October, and you'll see those on the calendar. And that often coincides with professional development on a statewide basis for our music teachers as well as physical education. So we try to work around those state conferences. The 3 days at Thanksgiving has been a tradition in Oregon that our families really appreciate, having that Wednesday before Thanksgiving off. We did talk about if parents or staff would prefer on going to school the Wednesday before Thanksgiving in order to give a 2-week winter break. And more of our respondents preferred that we have off that day and give up a few days at winter break. So that is something that is a result of the survey responses. So you can see there we recommend winter break start on December 3rd and we come back to school on January 4th. In terms of February, we have a PD recommendation on February 15th. That's a federal holiday, so some of our families prefer that we try to structure around federal holidays or the university calendar. And then our spring break, the preferred week was March 29th for our families. As HR directors, we try to coordinate as much as we can with area schools and UW-Madison. And so we try to go the last week in March where we can so that we have similar spring breaks. So that is the week that the HR directors are looking at, as well as UW-Madison has that as spring break as well. We have a professional development day August 23rd. We try to do a mix of Mondays and Fridays because our families tell us that's what they prefer. That day in April, we feel gives us time to have meaningful PD and also time to reflect and engage our students after that date. And then, as is customary, we built in 3 snow days in this calendar, so hoping to get out June 9th with a half day, but with the caveat that school could end earlier or later, depending on the number of snow days that we have. We did survey this year on the last day of school being a half day or a full day, because if you remember last year we had a full day due to inclement weather. So I wanted to survey on that this year, and it was very interesting because our families were really split on that. About a third preferred a half day, a third preferred a full day, and a third had no preference. And so really thinking that since we didn't have a critical mass of folks that wanted to move our tradition, my recommendation is to keep that as a half day, as well as if we do have a very snowy winter, it is nice to have that flexibility to add minutes if we need to on that day. What questions do you have for me on the calendar?
Did you say how many snow days you had factored in?
Yes, we build in 3.
Okay.
And so last year was the first year we had to use more than that. So I'm hoping that this year we're back on track. The other item that we talked about, and with Nate here, I know he may have some thoughts on this, is that last year we tried having seniors out early. And then when we had to approve the calendar for this year, we didn't know how that would go. So we kept that in last year's calendar. So with 2021, administration is continuing that recommendation now that we know how it worked. Jim couldn't be here tonight, but I have talked with him about this, and he did give me some talking points for your consideration that he would like to continue having the seniors out a little bit early. From his lens, it allowed just more time to help students be on track for graduation because they could identify a little bit earlier who maybe wasn't on track, gave some time for makeup incompletes or makeup maybe finals that were missed. So he felt that it was better in the student's interest to continue that. We did have some challenges with assessments, and so that is something the high school administration team is committed to working with the teacher, particularly those classes that might have had juniors and seniors. And one of the things that they're thinking about is really encouraging teachers that it doesn't have to be a final exam, that it could be more project-based or other types of assessments. So I know Jim is open to having those conversations with the teachers at the high school, but would like the board to continue having the seniors be out a little bit early.
I'd like to get Nate's perspective. I know last year it came down to that question, you know, that we just decided we would support whatever Nate and his team wanted to do, and I know it was a leap, and so I'd like to get your perspective.
Yeah, I will say, kind of going back historically to that conversation about last year's calendar, we were between that rock and the hard place that the administration was set on. We've got to have this date for graduation, and we really couldn't get our days and minutes in by that point. So it was just kind of at that point a no-brainer that for that year, the only answer and the only solution was for the seniors to be done earlier than the rest of the students. From the union's perspective, just one background thing that we'd like to share is that we'd really appreciate if we could have a collaborative process from the beginning of this, just so that, like, we really feel like walking in at this point, we're lobbing some grenades into the process here at the end and saying, you know what, okay, wait, stop a second, we've got objections, as opposed to being able to own some decisions on the earlier end there. From our perspective, we get that there's often about 10 to 15 students who are looking at struggling to graduate when it comes down to the end there. One of the notable things is most of those students have been identified at least a month earlier as at risk. And so then looking at not taking alternative measures, I mean, we could look at taking alternative measures sooner rather than after they haven't passed courses, like having to have this end date and then, oh, we knew they were at risk and they didn't pass. There are options in terms of how to handle that, and like certainly I get that the flexibility of that window there for that 10 to 15 students, that makes a difference. But we've got these maybe 15 students, and we're balancing that against the learning experience of somewhere in the ballpark of 500 students. When we talk about classes mixed with juniors and seniors, that's not a small amount. I will admit that both from the building level as well as from our union level, we have not taken the time to collect data and really survey and follow up on what happened last year. So I'm talking anecdotally from things that I do know at this point, which is being in the science department. I've talked at length with the science department about this. I've also touched base with a couple things that are happening and just have some perspective on some of the other things, but a lot of the anecdotes that I can share are from the science department in specific. We look at science courses and math courses, and essentially there are no courses that are exclusively seniors except for maybe BC Calculus and math, that we have mixed grade levels in almost all courses. So we're not looking at, okay, if you're teaching a senior course, you schedule things out to be appropriate for the seniors. We're looking at, in a lot of areas, you're making your plan for your seniors, you're making your plan for your underclassmen who aren't graduating out, which leads to a lot of disruption. Some courses decided to just cut their content a week earlier, so they had to cut a week of content from their course, which included some of those courses were as high as 3/4 juniors in them, but if they had a predominance enough of seniors in there, trying to make small alternate arrangements for that becomes a very complicating factor. So there's a lot to factor into this in terms of the educational impacts of having the seniors graduate early, and it's not an aspect of a large proportion of them are in senior-only classes. We have a very mixed, and on the level of personalization, we've given students a lot of freedom to chart their courses. There was a lot of disruption, and we had some students on their last 2 days of school taking as many as 5 exams over 2 days, where each day they had to be ready for 5 exams, and they were taking half of each of those exams on each of those days. I don't want to get into the merits of exams versus projects here, but I think there's a value in summative exams, and I don't think that our calendar would be the best way to drive those educational decisions. So I guess the bottom line for me is I don't have enough information in hand, and I don't think collectively we have enough information in hand to know all the educational impacts on both directions on this. And I think it would merit gathering more information. I think it would merit having more conversations about what that end of school year looks like for seniors.
Sure. So if you look at the calendar, and this one is a little bit different because graduation would be June 13th. So this one gives us a little more space because the way it's recommended, June 4th would be the last day for seniors and June 9th for K-11, but that's with 3 snow days built in. So let's say we didn't have any snow days, everybody would be out June 4th. Alternatively, if we had to add days, we still have time to do that before graduation. So let's say we added 2 more days, seniors would go until June 8th potentially if we needed them to, or they could be out June 4th. You know, that would be a decision point that the board would need to look at if seniors make up those days or not. Legally, they don't need to. Last year, I think we felt that it was so tight with graduation that we kept the seniors being out on the day they were planned to be out, because otherwise we wouldn't have had time to score exams and know who was ready to graduate. So we've got a little more room in this calendar. They could potentially be out on the same day, depending on if we have a nice winter or not. Additionally, in terms of, Jim did leave me some feedback that he talked about last year when the seniors were out early, that he received no negative feedback from staff about the early graduation, that he was working with staff that had 9th to 11th graders, and he did not receive any complaints about that. And so I think really when Nate raised this issue, I would say Jim was a little bit taken by surprise. And I know he's had conversations with you, Nate, since you've raised it, and you two have talked about that. He did talk about that we would be the only school in the conference that does not graduate early seniors other than Watertown. So the good news is that we have other schools that we can talk to see how we can make our process even better. So it's not as though we're the only school to grapple with this. In fact, we're sort of the outlier for not doing this. And he did say that he does give a lot of deference to teachers about what that assessment period looks like. So he does give voice and choice to the teachers about how, if they want to do an exam or projects or what they choose to do. So he would defer to the teacher about what they think is best for their classroom in terms of that assessment. And he just really did want to emphasize that it was really helpful in terms of being able to verify graduation status and allowing those who were struggling to have extra time to complete their coursework so that they could graduate.
I guess when we first did this, and correct me if I'm wrong, is this was part of policy committee when we floated the calendar for this. And Tim, you were on the committee too, but I thought that we had said that we wanted a dedicated review of that where the groups came together. And so I guess I'm just wondering is if it doesn't really impact this calendar, if this calendar can be approved except for that. But I think we really need some dedicated conversation about what went well, what didn't go well, and I would love for us to make the decision that's based on data with students, not some anecdote or some conjecture, and let us know what teachers did it successfully, who the issues were that was a problem in their class, and I guess some organized strategy about it instead of this or that or maybe or not. I just think that that was part of our original intent when we approved this as the policy committee, that there would be a dedicated discussion about that piece.
Yes, and that's a great point. I don't see a need for the board to make that decision tonight if they choose not to do that. I think really what parents really want to know from us is when's the first day of school and what do the vacation times look like?
Calendar tonight later on to reserve that question for you guys on the senior one and have the high school staff and Jim and you work on that issue? Okay, good.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. Any other dialogue? Great. Thanks for your input, Nate. All right. Made it through the committee of the whole, so we need a motion to adjourn from the committee of the whole.
So moved.
Is there a second? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye, opposed? All right, we're back to our regular consent calendar. Katie, could you get a score for us? It's just a 13-7. So back when I first joined the board, Dave Williams was the president, and we would schedule our school board meeting to start like at 5:30 on the night that Packers were on Monday Night Football. So just, yeah, I would take feedback, but anyway. Consent calendar, is there any item that any board member wishes to have removed from the consent calendar? Okay, seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve.
I'll abstain on the minutes. I was not at one
Yep.
of the meeting minutes.
I move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Flanagan with a second. I will note that we have a number of board donations that are subject to the motion. Megan McGarry with $150 to donating for orchestra rental fees for students in need. The Oregon Swim Club donated $400 for the splash pad. Lapete donated school supplies for district students. The Rotary Club donated $147 for the splash pad. Holy Mother of Consolation Church donated $150 for school supplies. Pure Integrity Homes donated $1,000 for a scholarship. And Robert Steinberg and Cynthia Mealy donated $100 for students in need of clothing. So we appreciate those donations and the support that all those folks and organizations have provided to the district. I don't think we have any contracts on there, so all in favor signify by saying aye to approve the items on the consent calendar. Aye. Opposed? We're approved. Communications from the public. Board Policy 18004 has established the opportunity for the public to address the board. Is there anybody registered tonight? Going once? Going twice? We're done. Informational items D, OEA report. Anything, you guys? Okay. Thanks for coming tonight and joining us for the committee of the whole. Student report. Hi, Jenna. I had coffee with Jenna and Cubby last week to talk about their role, and why don't you introduce yourself and what you're going to do and where you're headed? You were the homecoming queen, weren't you?
Yes,
Yeah, I
was.
saw your picture on the front of the Observer.
Thank you.
And you waved. Do you have the princess wave on? There you go. Very good.
Okay, I'm Jenna Sharkus. I am the co-student body president at the high school with Cubby Vandermouse, as previously said. I will be sitting in during the school board meetings for this first semester, and Cubby Vandermouse will take over for second semester, and I'll come as he needs, and for me as well for this semester. And I'm just hoping to learn from all of you here and give any input that I can.
Right. And you're going to go where next year, do you know?
Hopefully, I've applied to Madison in Minnesota, and Madison is my top choice at this point.
And what are you going to study?
Business, not specifically anything at this point.
Cool. Well, welcome. We glad you're with us. And as I said earlier, and as we talked about at coffee, you're going to play a role in our rollout of the voting process for the school name. So we'll talk more about that in the next couple weeks.
All right. Sounds
Okay.
good.
Anybody have anything you want to share with Jenna? Else we'll move on. All right. Do we know whether the soccer team won tonight or not? Okay. What? Packers kicked a field goal before half. Okay, that takes us to action items, the 2020-2021 school calendar. We have a proposal in front of us, a recommendation from Gina, with the understanding that if we accept that, that they would keep open the dialogue regarding the last day for seniors and graduation. So I need a motion to approve the calendar as presented to us tonight with that understanding. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, any further discussion? Would you take the roll, please?
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Ms. Feeney?
Yes.
Ms. Oderico? Yes. Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Mr. Zach?
Yes, we have a calendar subject to further conversation, and we can communicate that to our parents. Thanks for your work, Gina, on that. And it's not easy. I mean, we've talked about in a perfect world, this isn't the type of schedule that we'd have, but given the constraints that we have by law and culture, it's what we have very few options in terms of how we manipulate that day. So,
It is nice that we have a whole week before Labor Day to get started. I mean, it gives us a lot more flexibility to that calendar.
yeah. Okay, item F, information items, professional development pathways report. Leslie, is that you?
John and I.
Okay, floor is yours.
Thank you.
All right, we'll just. Well, it says on. There we go. Okay, I just had to get really close. We'll wait for this to come up, hopefully. As an introduction for anybody who doesn't know, we've established professional development pathways for all as part of the teacher compensation plan. That was one of the things we did, and so this is sort of the update. So we'll review where we've been and also talk about where we're going to go in the future, and it should be fairly short, unless you have extensive questions. So this is the end of the second year. June 30th was the end of the second year of the teacher comp professional learning pathway plan. We have 3 pathways, so new educators have their own pathway that they go through because that is a significant year of learning to be new to the profession or new to us. And then we have 2 other ones. We have highly effective practices, which are based on we'll talk about it more later, but this is something that we chose years ago as the focus being on having sustained ongoing learning of professional skills instead of having it be something that changed every year. And so that is significant, and that's based largely on the research that John Hattie has done on what those effective practices are. The other one is educational equity. We've been working for the last few years with the National Equity Project, and that's been significant. We have equity teams in each of our buildings. We had a district equity leadership team where we learned from National Equity Project how to do a lot of introspection and reflection about our own, our own background, our own culture, our own bias, before rolling that out into action points. And woven through all of these is the idea of personalized learning and a whole child emphasis, because obviously those are both values that the board has and had, and also high priorities. And so those do not have their own pathway that's separate from the others, because those really do need to be embodied in everything we do. So we didn't want to have those be something that appeared to be separate. So don't worry that we don't have a whole child emphasis, or don't worry that we're not abandoning personalized learning. Neither of those is true. Those are just you see elements of those in everything else that we do. Next slide, please. So examples of highly effective practices. Well, first, the 4 practices that we've highlighted are clarity through the use of learning targets. This is basically saying both teachers and students should be very clear about what they're expected to learn or be able to do. as you might expect, knowing what you're supposed to do makes it much more likely that you'll be able to do it. And there's much research that bears that out. Effective feedback is another one. Basically how to give students input on how they're doing, knowing where they need to go, and knowing where they are at so that they can make choices about what they're going to do next. The next one is formative assessment. As the board knows from the Assessment for Student Achievement paper in 2010, there's a big difference between summative assessment, formative assessment, and so formative assessment is one of those that has a really high effect size based on the data for improving student learning. And then the last one is goal setting. And, you know, it's hard to talk about any of these individually because they all go so closely together. You can't really know where you're going without having set a goal. You can't really give feedback on something unless you know, unless you've done some formative assessment to see where people are at. And so they all work together really in conjunction, which is why these are the ones also because they all have really high effect sizes. That's why these have been chosen. Some of the examples of highly effective practices are Leslie and I co-teach the Foundations of Highly Effective Practices course that we've had many teachers go through either during the school day or as sort of a blended course. And then the instructional coaches at the schools do follow-up courses that focus real specifically on one of these highly effective practices. So after the overview as sort of a prereq, then people can dive in a little more deeply on those. UW Math Equity Cohort, the UW-Madison School of Education has year-long professional learning courses specifically about math instruction through an equity lens, where and the feedback from that has been great because it talks about how the teachers who participate see their students more as people as they're designing instruction, which goes back to that whole child emphasis. The Greater Madison Writing Project is also through the University of Wisconsin, but obviously with an emphasis on writing practices, and that's part of the National Writing Project. And AIW stands for Authentic Intellectual Work, and this is something that they're doing at the high school, which is super helpful because it provides a structure for people to look at the types of tasks that they're asking the students to do, and then evaluating those to look at how authentic they are, how relevant and how rigorous they are. And that's led by Bruce King and Laura Lang, who are professors at UW-Madison. And they continue to work with us with some groups that meet, I think, every 2 weeks at the high school, before school or after school, to go and look at student work. So that's a very regularly meeting, ongoing process that teachers go through. Next slide. So personalized learning, a couple notes on personalized learning. One is that the whole idea of personalized learning is growing and adapting, and an important thing to inform you of is that there's been sort of a terminology change, which should be no surprise in education because we keep on changing the names of things. But this is one that even CISA 1 has adopted. So personalized learning is becoming replaced with the term of learner-centered practices. And so we're still personalizing, but we're doing it through the instruction that we provide to students through using those highly effective practices, which by their nature are going to be individual when you do formative assessment for a student. And then also we're personalizing by providing access through the equitable allocation of resources. And we're personalizing the learning through culturally responsive teaching. So those are all examples of the way that we're personalizing, but you may not hear the words as often, partly because they sort of, the meaning has been kind of diffused as everybody's jumped on the bandwagon. And so we want to be pretty specific about what we're talking about. And personalized learning was never the goal in itself. So personalized learning was always to empower learners to own their own learning and to have that sense of agency. And so that's really what the learner-centered practices and learner-centered instruction does. And some people call it learner-centered learning.
Yeah, that really dovetails cleaner with Rickleball, the Five Levers.
Yeah, it very much does.
Okay.
Yeah, so even the Institute for Personalized Learning at CISA 1, they're not going to change their name, but they are kind of changing their terminology. And so their current assessment process talks about looking at learner-centered practices in teachers' practices. So for equity, some examples of what we've been doing here. There's the, Andy, you can go to the next slide, sorry. The Critical Consciousness Institutes, we've had many teachers go through these, provided by two teachers I guess they're administrators from Middleton. Done that. Justified Anger Coalition is actually sponsored by the Nehemiah Corporation, which is out of Madison. And they've provided some in-service and learning opportunities, like an incomplete integration seminar, where Gloria Ladson-Billings spoke, and a bunch of us participated in that. Teaching Tolerance, actually they're a national organization, and they provide the social justice standards. And so we've had people go to training on that so that we actually have standards for social justice that we can use in our teaching. And also we've had a lot of people do the Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain book by Zaretta Hammond, which is a really fascinating book based on neuroscience and being culturally responsive as a teacher to the cultures of the students who you have. So it's a fascinating read. I encourage you to read it. It's really interesting. Next slide. One thing, this is sort of I guess not foreshadowing, but this is not a report on last year. This is something we're doing this year. We're partnering with the Nehemiah group out of Madison. They have some professional development opportunities and some professional services that we are going to partner with them on to help us more effectively work with the families who have students who are underrepresented with us. Some of the things they do, they provide facilitated learning sessions for staff. So kind of our own professional development. They also will provide co-facilitation of a K-12 parent group. At the high school, they already have a group that's meeting. It's like the Minority Student Union group, and they are working with that, but there's been some feedback that we'd like to open that up to a larger group. And this is a way to do it for the whole district, and they can help us with that, just the facilitation of that. They can also do a community forum for us, which is facilitated, and that's something that they have some expertise in. They have some background. They're very community-oriented, and so that's another thing that we feel like we could use their expertise in through the community partnership. And it has also the benefit that the vice president of it happens to be an Oregon parent. So we already have some community connections with them. And I'm going to turn it over to Leslie to talk about the new teacher strand.
So our new educators, when they start with us, they have a first year plan that is pretty well scripted out to help them understand everything they need to know to be a really effective educator in Oregon. And of course that's differentiated because there are some people coming to us who are brand new. This is their very first teaching job. And there are some people coming to us when they've been teaching somewhere else for 20 years. So there are some components of the new educator pathway that are required for all, and some that are differentiated based on their experience and what they did before they became an Oregon educator. But for the most part, they all attend new educator orientation, and that is about 24 hours of their pathway right there. So that takes up quite a bit of their beginning time. And they're with us for, as I said, 24 hours, but it really is spread out over 4 days. And then all of our new teachers, unless they've worked out something different with their principal because they have a different area of passion or interest they want to pursue, we're offering something called the Optimal Learning Environment class. It's based off a research-based framework from the New Teacher Center, and you've heard of our work with Dane County New Teacher Project over the years. The Dane County New Teacher Project is basically the local version of the New Teacher Project, which is a national organization. And they have done research regarding all the effective components of a classroom, and it's referred to as the optimal learning environment, or OLE. Interestingly, It aligns up beautifully with our 5 values. As a matter of fact, we could take the components of OLE and put our values on the headings and it would all make sense. So it's really nice that way, but it's also great to have a research-based tool that we can formulate all of our first-year teaching instruction on. And that course is taught by Stacy Sargent, a first grade teacher at Netherwood, in addition to our new mentor, Cindy Hedstrom, and I'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute. Most of the courses that are taught for our new educators are taught by our coaches and our mentor. But their experience isn't all necessarily about courses that they're taking. And that's where we're getting into where things are just starting to change and evolve. So we had a full release mentor who was concentrating primarily on new to the profession first year students or educators, brand new educators. Well, the state changed the requirements regarding what is an effective mentoring program, and they said we had to provide trained mentors for people in years 1, 2, and 3 of their profession. We were also learning over time that people who are coming to us from other districts, they need more support perhaps than we were offering them. And we were making some assumptions because they had experience, but that didn't mean that perhaps they didn't need a higher level of support with our curricular demands, etc. So the coaches and Colleen Christensen, before her very recent retirement, formed a team about a year ago to put together what we like to refer to as a continuum of supports for educators who are new to the school district. And that would include being able to create a program that would provide mentorship for all 3 of your first years, in addition to support for people who are new to us. We knew our full release mentor could not do that. That's way too much. So we applied for and received a grant to have all of our coaches trained through Dane County New Teacher Project as mentors. So now our full release mentor and our coaches have all been assigned people who are new to the profession or people who are in year 2 or year 3. That way, we have a larger group of people who are trained to meet the needs of those new to the profession, and we can utilize really effective practices such as coaching cycles as part of the mentorship process. So we're really excited about this change, and we are meeting monthly to monitor the process because for the coaches, it's everything they used to do, and now they're also mentoring. So that is really a shift in their responsibilities, and we're monitoring how that goes. And if it goes well this year, then we think we would do a more complete blend of mentoring and coaching, and also train our new mentor, Cindy Hedstrom, in coaching practices, so that the whole team would be trained in both. And the biggest difference between the two is that mentoring simply places more emphasis on the developmental needs of those brand new to the profession. Otherwise, the tools and the strategies are well aligned and practically identical. For our work with the whole child, next one. He's right on it. Last year, as part of the Department of Justice grant, we had to have a minimum of 3 hours of trauma-sensitive schools training for every full-time employee. So while we already had a couple of 100 people who had taken the full 8 hours of trauma-sensitive schools, we have now added on to that, and every other full-time person has taken a minimum of 3 hours of training in that area. We also are growing our trained teams for collaborative problem solving. You've heard of that as part of the work that Rachel Hansen has been doing with the research of Ross Green. So that is now we're extending the trained team to be including our elementaries. So Rachel is working on a training plan for groups on at all of those schools. And we have the Onward book study, which is about cultivating emotional resilience in ourselves as educators. And that has been so popular. It is being as book studies is being facilitated by our social emotional learning coaches, social workers, and our instructional coaches. It was the PLC book for all coaches last year. And we have over 200 staff members in this book study right now. So it has the potential to be to have a lot of impact, because we know this is a very rewarding and very challenging profession, and we want to really support people as they build up their own emotional resilience and tackling some of the very heavy things that teachers need to do every day. So for a work with whole child is one of the exciting things, that because of the social workers who are covering several buildings, but also our social emotional learning coaches, due to that, we're gaining some real cohesiveness in these whole child supports. For example, this year, all 3 elementary schools are offering the same social emotional lessons to their students. And that's all being coordinated through the social emotional learning coach. PBIS is gaining a sense of cohesion in all of the areas due to this, as is the collaborative problem solving. So that is definitely one positive, or several positive things coming from the whole child offerings and the people who are offering them. Here's an example of one educator in our district and how this person spent their 40 hours of additional professional development last year. You see, it was a National Association of Gifted Children conference, and because across Wisconsin there are fewer substitutes available, a lot of conferences are taking place on the weekends. There's a lot of Friday night and Saturday conferences, which is an interesting development. A large portion of our educators attended a screening of the movie The Hate You Give, which is a really popular book that students at the high school and middle school are reading. And so when the movie came out, it was a powerful story, and a couple hundred of us attended together in a theater in Fitchburg. This person also actually co-facilitated a class called Social Emotional Learning at OHS. They attended a 7.5-hour session on building global communities, a conversation around immigration. 9.5 hours at a conference on diverse and resilient LGBTQ students, and 2.5 hours on helping students apply for the university.
Here's another person who focused more on highly effective practices, and so there are a lot of the same things here. But what I think is interesting is, this person, like many, went way above their 40 hours of required training because there are so many things that are offered that are really useful. So this person, in addition to taking the foundations of highly effective practices and then the extended classes that go in depth on feedback and learning targets, they also went to trauma-sensitive schools, which obviously was mandated by the Department of Justice grant, but also youth mental health first aid, a functional training workshop, and the Hate You Give screening, which is more along the equity lines, and UW-Madison Badger Best Practices workshop. So there's some stuff that's content specific, some things that are still about equity. So people are really going above and beyond in most cases and taking more than just the required 40 hours. And I think that speaks to both the professionality of teachers, but also that they're being, they're not just focusing narrowly on one thing. They see the connections and are interested in a lot of these different aspects.
And then here's an example of someone who went narrow and deep, and that has just as much value. It's one of our teachers who spent all 40 hours working with Greater Madison Writing Project. It was an in-depth summer experience followed by monthly 3-hour evening meetings, all about the writing process. And that particular, the Greater Madison Writing Project experience has had a significant impact on a number of our teachers and the way they think about teaching writing. And then this person did an additional 11 hours for every teacher leader, because that happened in June, and a lot of people were excited about something they had done already this year and had a project planned coming up, And that's when they use the every teacher a leader possibility to give themselves time as a team to talk about what they wanted to do based on their new learning.
So looking ahead, basically for 1920, we're continuing on this philosophical approach that we've had for the last 3 years because it's worked really well, and people like consistency. So we still have our areas of focus. We're not really changing those at this point. I mean, we haven't solved equity, and we're not all perfect in our practices. So we're going to keep on learning about those. And generally, people have really liked that rather than education that has a tendency to sort of like swing as a pendulum and say, oh, here's the cool thing this year. And then people think, well, I'll just wait this out and there'll be something different next year. We've decided that the things that are really important take time. And so we're going to stick with those. We're also trying to do this personalized approach because there are hundreds of opportunities that teachers can choose from for their professional growth. So we're kind of modeling what we ask other people to do by saying let's customize it by interest and by whatever your needs are. We're developing the internal capacity of teachers because like the Every Teacher a Leader Summit that we held is developing the leadership capabilities of people and has an ongoing development portion. So we're not just, it's developing people into becoming catalysts in whatever aspect they serve in. So we know that professional development, to be effective, has to be job embedded, which is why in the calendar we have like one professional development day each month, because you have to have those things that are embedded, that you can learn, that you can implement over time, come back and reflect on, make adjustments. And so really the whole idea of this job embedded professional development is really key to what we're doing and that it's really applicable. So as we move forward, we want to make sure that we're continuing to offer the pathways, but I mean, people have said, well, gosh, if I'm doing these effective practices, I really need to know a lot about equity in order to make them culturally responsive. We're like, yes, they're not isolated. So they really blend, and people are really taking a look at these and asking, how can I really apply this? And so we've developed the culture of inquiry. We've developed the culture of innovation. People have really appreciated the opportunity to say, oh, look, we're going to do some action research on this because we want to know like what the impact is of what we're doing, which is part of Hattie's research. So as we move forward, one of the things we need to do is create next steps for the next round of pathways. And so like one of the things we're doing on the personalized learning front is we're going to soon be identifying sort of a steering committee for developing the next 3 years of, for example, the highly effective practices pathway, because we're not moving on to something else, but we need to grow and extend that. So that's kind of where we're going with this. We're kind of sticking to the course, but also progressing forward because we know we're not there yet. And I believe that's it. Any other comments you want to make about that? Okay. So thank you, but feel free to ask us any questions you may have.
Anybody? That was really good.
I have a question. This is kind of a detail, but this concept of authentic intellectual work really is intriguing. And I don't want it to have to take a lot of time, so maybe to cut to the chase, could you give me an example of authentic versus an inauthentic type of intellectual work?
Yeah, thank you. The audience of the work is a good example. Who the student is doing the work for. If the student is just doing the work for the teacher, that's not that authentic. If they're doing the work that is actually for someone else, for example, if it's for general publication, if it's for a specific cause that benefits back to the community, or if it's contributing to a larger body of work that can be used by others, those would be one indicator that it's authentic.
Solving a problem?
Yeah.
Okay, so that is part of the writing curriculum. Is that concept being applied in other areas?
The AIW teams are actually interdisciplinary teams, and so on each one there's like social studies and math and language arts. So they are multidisciplinary, and that's actually an interesting thing because people who have gone through it at first from what I've heard. I sat in on the launch for them, but I don't sit in on the meetings that happen every 2 weeks with everything. But Andrea Anderson and Brad Brunig, the instructional coaches at the high school, do actually go to all those, or some of it. Well, they both go to them. They don't both go to all of them because some of them happen at the same time. But they shared that originally people were like, well, you know, how would someone from a different department or different content area be able to give me help on this? But through the framework and the structure that they use to actually go through and look at the work, they found that it's actually really helpful to get an outside perspective on the work, sometimes because people can see their own content area very clearly, but not from the perspective of someone who's not familiar with it. So they're cross-disciplinary, which has come to be seen as a big benefit, which is really nice.
Thank you.
Going once, going twice. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right, that takes us to number 2, superintendent's report. Brian?
Couple of quick items. This week, Tim Krista, Gina and I have an SRO meeting scheduled with the Village of Oregon. And I had tossed out a couple of dates for our parent meeting on what I'll call the SRO items. And those possibilities are November 5, 12, or 14. And I would like to offer them up at our meeting this week. While it will be an Oregon School District meeting, we are attempting to partner with the Oregon PD, and if one of those dates works better with Lieutenant Pagankoff, we'll try to get that set up, so I hopefully will have a firm date for you by the end of the week. Homecoming is in the books, and we had no rain for the parade. Hooray, hooray. If you had an opportunity to see the parade, it is a community event like none other in the Oregon School District. A little school construction update. Tomorrow is our tour at 4:30, so if you're meeting us at the site, please bring an older pair of shoes or boots, or your newer pair of shoes and boots will look older by the time the tour completes. Or by the time we complete it. I had an opportunity on the way out of town to stop at the site on Saturday morning with my wife, and I did not wash my car. Your car will look like it's been on a school construction site as well. Last week I had the opportunity to work with fellow superintendents on the Dane County Future Board meeting for equity. So we're excited about that possibility. We don't have a date or time, but the feedback that we received from all Dane County school districts was positive, that there was an interest in another board meeting. We are in Camp Gray season, and I'm going to try to get to Camp Gray for a little bit tomorrow to see our 6th graders. And if you've ever been there, you know that's just a lot of fun for our 6th graders, and a little on the hectic side too for us adults. And then lastly, I know you're familiar with the accidental bus fire that occurred over the last couple of weeks. And just to point out, our contractors are phenomenal individuals and people, and they share and share alike, and they help one another out when one contractor is in a jam. And of course that happened again, and in spite of losing almost 4 buses at around midnight, the next morning our bus routes ran on time because our contractors work together and share and are great partners. And another great advantage for having the busing system that we have in the district. They're really focused on working for the betterment of our kids and our families and our communities and our greater communities. So what was tragic turned out to be no interruption of services. So thanks to all of our bus contractors for doing that. And that concludes my report, unless any of you have a specific question.
All right, seeing none. Takes us to future agenda. We have a couple carryovers from tonight, the boundary attendance area, and then our naming thing. And then Brian and I will work on putting together the agenda. So if anybody has anything they want to have added, let me know. We do have the tour tomorrow night, and we also have an expulsion hearing on Wednesday night. So it's busy board week. So. Okay, checkout. Courtney? Troy? Anna?
Two very quick things. The first is, if you haven't had a chance to read your school news magazine, there are 3 articles featured in here. The first of which that are Oregon specific. The first of which, the headliner, Digging In, is written by one of our own teachers, Lisa Ike, a 3rd grade teacher at Netherwood. And then our schools are also highlighted in the article on farm to school in Wisconsin, both Brooklyn Elementary and the Oregon District as a whole. So it was really awesome to read through this and see our school highlighted 3 separate times. That was so cool. And then I'll share another quick story. My son is learning about memoir writing in English, and he went up north for a youth hunt, and he got his first deer, and he was so excited, and he ran inside, and he called me to say I wasn't with him, to tell me that he'd gotten this deer. And he said, "Mom, I'm just so excited. I'm going to write a memoir about this. And it's just such a wonderful experience. And I have one more sensory detail to share with you." And I was like, "Okay, bud, what's that?" And he said, "I could feel my heart pump in my eyes." And so I just thought I would share that story because he was so excited, and I need to remind him to write that memoir before he forgets that sensory detail. So that's all I have to share.
Barb? Tim? Krista?
Just one quick thing. I am the board representative on the district's wellness committee, and they're really doing some amazing work. So it might be something of future interest for the board to give an update from the wellness committee. And then also the new food service director was there, and she is dynamite. And I think it would be great for the board to hear from her too.
Great. Thanks for doing it. There's also a very scintillating article on board communications in that journal you might want to read. And my neighbor got a deer too. This 15-year-old neighbor across the street, he got his first deer too, and he was the same way. So we lent him our vacuum sealer. So I've got a promise of some venison from that. I will write a memoir about that. On Saturday night, Nate Mendel, our PAC director, hosted the first of his concert series with Jane Powell. It was very well attended. It was a terrific show, and I think that's going to be a big success based upon the feedback that I heard from the people who attended it. Really liked it. What he did with the lighting and the sound Andy was there was pretty spectacular. It was really fun. It was about an hour and a half long. It was good attendance, not great, so it's a good start and room to fill. So with that, we'll see everybody tomorrow night, and then those of you at the expulsion on Wednesday, and then in 2 weeks for our board meeting. But until then, we'll need a motion.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned at 9:18. Thanks, everyone. And the PAC's now losing 6.